Hey everyone, welcome back to Chicana Studies 101. Let's get into it. We're going to be lecturing today about Chicana feminism and political art. So let's look at the class agenda and what we got going on for the lecture. We're going to be defining Chicana feminism, so this is key for your understanding of certain politics, issues directly affecting Chicanas, and then thinking about feminism. We're going to highlight artists, and we're going to look at some politicized art. So hopefully you'll be able to bring all these concepts together at the end of the lecture. Chicana feminism. There's no simple definition, and there's a variety of ideas, no surprise. But we can hone in on a couple things that are key to understanding Chicana feminism. I'm going to use the term feminism as a generic way to think about feminine or female equality. Other Chicanas have called this mujeristas and things like that. But today we'll go ahead and work with the term feminism. So what does Chicana feminism stand for? So it's definitely going to be political stance against patriarchy and forms of disempowerment and silence. So these are very key when understanding the rights or treatment of all women, but in this case we're focusing on Chicana mujeres, Mexican women, and also by extension Latina women, if you will, and also indigenous women. A lot of Chicana feminists, a lot of Chicanas identify as native or indigenous as well. So what's going to be key in understanding their political stance is going to be deconstructing patriarchy. So what is a patriarchal society? And then the connections of it between understanding within a patriarchal society how women, Chicana women, are disempowered, and key is the silence. Okay, so we'll see that here. So definitely what is the ultimate call for Chicana feminism is the liberation, freedom from racism and sexism. And here you'll see that I have a plus sign, and this will mean other things besides just racism or sexism. It could be classism, able-bodyism, one's linguistic ability or nationality, and we'll get into that. So gender. So it's not just a sole focus on one thing, such as perhaps racism that Chicanas will face in American society, or gender subordination. It's going to be intersectional, and we'll get to that in a moment. So cultural pride is key when understanding what it means to be Chicana from a political standpoint. So having integrity and dignity as a people, be recognized and respected as equal within society, the larger society, within their culture, within their families. So again, back to things that are not so easily quantified. We're thinking about integrity and dignity and pride and cultural pride. And specifically, what does it mean to be Mexican and native and have our cultures in that sense? So when one says that they are Chicana, they are saying that they have deep pride and that they have integrity and they have dignity. They want to embody that dignity in society, because in a patriarchal society or a sexist or a quote-unquote machista society, women are not always able to access that. But here we're looking at that cultural pride of our Mexican roots, of our deep Native American, Mesoamerican living evolutionary roots. Okay, so back to that particular culture. And we know that this is important because for Mexicans in the US, there has always been state efforts and policies and racism that has forced them into forms of assimilation or embracing whiteness. So that you're going to see that comparison there. So what is intersectionality? I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but let's look at this definition. And this is also coming from Black feminism standpoints. Kimberly Crenshaw's work is excellent for this, but today we're going to go ahead and look at what that basic definition of intersectionality means. So understanding forms of oppression, domination, discrimination, how that works in American society. So what does these oppressions look like in real life, right? and the forming and the functioning within our societies. So social positions are interconnected and cannot be separate. So if you are Chicana, if you are undocumented, if you are queer, if you are low income, those are part of those intersectional identities that are really embedded within an oppressive system that marginalizes that type of identity. So we can't separate that, right? They're interconnected. So it's not a single issue, and there's a vast way that somebody can show up in society, right? In some moments they have some privilege, and in other moments they may have these very oppressive or discriminatory forms against them. But we're looking at how does the American society oppress particular people, particular bodies, particular genders, and thinking about those intersectional identities. So one's position as a mujer, as a woman, that would be their gender, right? And then therefore sexism, but also a variety of things: their sexuality, racial identity, their cultural background, their nationality, are they undocumented, these types of things, their linguistic skills, are they bilingual, are they migrant, do they have any of these types of variety of identities. And then also class, right? So will be, are they poor, are they low income, are they middle class, are they wealthy? So looking at that particular social position, I gave you an example earlier. So if you think of a mujer that may be undocumented from Mexico or Central America, what kind of linguistic skills? Maybe she's bilingual, maybe her English isn't very well spoken. So she'll face discrimination in that sense. Nationality, she's undocumented. Definitely cultural. You can think about racism, perhaps people saying things like go back to Mexico, but go back to Latin America, you don't belong here. So that's also embedded in racism. And then again, these cultural forms forcing brown folks to always leave their culture behind and assimilate into the dominant culture, which we know is white culture, Eurocentric culture. And then definitely sexuality is going to be key. So thinking about the ways that women get punished for their sexuality, and we'll look at this in more detail here in a moment to really flesh out this concept of intersectionality. Okay, so I want you to take it serious. It's not. I was listening to an interview by a key author, and the person that coined this, as I mentioned earlier, Kimberly Crenshaw, and she had some critiques of people using her work, if you will, in kind of like a way that's not critical, that is not about oppression, domination, or discrimination. So you can't be like, oh, well, my identity is a skater, and like I love sushi. I mean, it's not this superficial kind of subculture, but thinking about those particular forms of oppression. But women definitely face sexism in sports or skateboarding. That's legit. But have that cultural understanding in the context of power and oppression when thinking about intersectionality. Speak back to power is key. So, what do Chicana feminists, writers, activists, artists do? They're going to recognize those forms of oppression, identify them from the societal standpoint. They're going to speak up against silence and abuse within the society, within the cultures, within the home, the mainstream society. So it's about this voice or uncovering to speak up, and to literally speak up, but also do it through the works of scholarship, academics, some of the things that we're learning in class, art, and we'll get that in a moment. So again, it's key to what is it that they're speaking up against? Oppressive societies, okay? Oppressive ideas about women, brown women specifically, okay? So what's really key in terms of oppression and patriarchy is going to be the silence around those issues. Any types of abuse that go undetected, that go unnoticed, and that are forced to go silent. So give voice to difficult things to deal with, taboo things, extreme forms of violence, sexuality. So some of the things that a lot of people are taught within particular communities that are no-nos to talk about, that are taboo. So sexuality, puberty, sex, these types of things. So that would be one example. But to shine light and to unearth these things and issues and atrocities that have, one, been silenced, and two, been seen as uncomfortable to talk about. Even racism, right, is uncomfortable to talk about for a lot of people. So that in many respects, though the foundation of American society is embedded within racism, the genocide of Native people, slavery, the takeover of, Mexican lands, indigenous lands, depending on what form of history we're looking at, right, or what time period. I mean, talking about race is taboo. People are very scared of it. So now imagine adding things of gender or sexuality and things like that, okay? So what else would they speak back to? Really empowering yourself, empowering your community, and against this disempowerment or disconnect with yourself, disconnect with your community. So that's very key, because for you to identify with some of this stuff, you have to in some ways follow these steps 1 through 4. Recognize that oppression, recognize that power structure, speak up. But before you can speak up, right, you have to find that voice, you have to know that information, and you have to break through taboos to really honor your voice. And then to be more elaborate with that is, how are you empowered, right? How are our communities empowered, right? Instead of always being disempowered or abused in that sense. So these would be some of the things that people within Chicana academics, again, activists, artists, are shedding light upon, and in many ways what we call speaking back to power. So how do we apply this? Activism, organizing, challenging our families, bringing information to our families, learning new things within our families. Perhaps you have children or young brothers and sisters or cousins. How do you teach them? How do you set that example? Okay. Creative efforts, creative arts, poetry, novels, Real Women Have Curves. We've looked at that in class, these types of things. Academic efforts. A lot of us, we've gone through the history. We've studied the origins of Chicano studies. We've looked at some Chicana feminist works, as we're doing now. So also the creation of focusing on the Chicana, and specifically their experience, that also got ignored within the larger Chicano development or Chicano history that was heavily male dominated. And the arts, of course, all forms of arts, dancing, let's see, murals, some other artistic pieces I'm going to show you a little bit later today. Let's look at Yolanda Lopez. So she is one of the artists critical to the Chicano movement. So there we have their artists during the Chicano movement. And so you're going to see that her work is going to focus on gender and cultural identity. She's a third Mexican-American, third generation. She was raised in San Diego by her mom and her grandparents. So let's look at some of her art. But one thing that a lot of Chicana artists have in common is going to be this effort for political awareness. So workers, women's rights, Native culture, Native heritage. So when we're looking at the art, I want you to pay attention to what messages are being put forth within the work. So very specifically right now, we'll look at some of Yolanda Lopez's work, and we're going to see this, the woman that works, right? Women's rights, workers' rights, Native culture and heritage. So art has a specific meaning, and this is key because for these particular artists, there's the activist or political awareness element. Art isn't just something for the sake of art, or quote beautiful, or I have time to draw a sunset type of art, but really thinking about an art of politics and a politics of art. So this is a quote from Yolanda Lopez. So thinking about how art itself is used as a form of politics and is exposing particular issues. So let's look here at this one, 1978 by Lopez. Who's the illegal alien pilgrim? So if you look here with me, again, you're going to see these issues. take a moment. What is it that you see? What issues are being presented? What have you learned? What can you draw from this imagery here? So, no surprise, the title, right? The words itself are impactful and powerful and are steeped within a deep history of who Mexicans are in the US or how they're constructed. And then also a critique of Euro-Americans, what we know as white folks in the US, right? So here, who's the illegal alien pilgrim? So for Mexicans, a lot of us have Native American, Mesoamerican roots and heritage that is thriving, that is evolving. And some of us are disconnected from that, and others of us are more connected to that. So that's that tension she's bringing up here between race relations of Mexicans and by extension Latinos, always seen as illegal aliens, as foreign, as criminal, as non-belonging to the nation. As if you see here, this is some kind of Aztec type of figure, male. He's holding some papers that say immigration plans, kind of crunkled up there. So again, ideas of immigration, who gets to immigrate, right? So when Native Americans, Mesoamericans, Mexicans, Latinos are always considered illegal within the boundaries of the United States, right? So who's a true immigrant is what it's pointing to. White Eurocentric folks, they're never stopped or pulled over to check their papers in that respect. So again, these long tensions, racial issues, immigration, and creating an outsider. And what was key is also this kind of Aztec type of figure, this native Mexican American Chicano, if you will, and harkening back to our native ancestry, our living roots of being Native American in the United States. So here we have a series that she did, Portrait of the Artist as the Virgin of Guadalupe, from the Guadalupe series, 1978. So let's look at this. For a lot of folks, this might be like, whoa, what is she doing with the imagery of the Virgin of Guadalupe? But she's not disrespecting it, but offering an empowering view or way to think about her, okay? So this is a self-portrait of her. And this goes really nicely with the Chicano Park documentary. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that on YouTube and bring out those discussion questions, because she goes into a lot of detail about this series. So here she is as a runner. She's empowered, but she's still respecting the imagery around the Virgen of Guadalupe, even though it might be confusing to understand at first. When a lot of Chicana artists really did reframe the imagery around La Virgen de Guadalupe, they were getting death threats back in the day. And so you can see how certain people were so staunch and so narrow-minded to think about the Virgencita, okay? So here's another part of that series. And this is actually supposed to be her mother. So again, you're going to see a debunking of these dominant imageries and couching them within a Chicana framework and perspective. So here's her mother, again within the figure of the Virgen, you know, as a seamstress. So you're going to see a lot of the goal of the art is to destabilize patriarchal and Catholic expectations of women. So a couple of other pieces here, and again, women's rights, workers' rights, motherhood, indigenous women. So Lopez critiques patriarchy, capitalism, and racialized labor in work, such as her Women's Work is Never Done series. So this is the Women's Work is Never Done, and you'll see these screen prints, and this is coming out of the 1990s, okay? So if you look here, a lot of times when we think about farm workers or people that work in the fields, we don't have an imagery of women farm workers. So that's actually really important. We usually just think of the men. So we have women. In this top one here, you'll see Dolores Huerta, a major champion for workers' rights. Cesar Chavez is, you know, one of the main organizers alongside Cesar Chavez. Okay, if we look at the second image here, we have a woman and she has a baby with her. So really thinking about those issues of race, class, gender. Perhaps she doesn't have enough money for childcare. Working in the field and having to take your baby is not the most ideal conditions. Farm workers have faced a lot of discrimination, and plight working within the farms. Pesticides have been sprayed over them, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Their health has been at risk. So what does it mean when you're forced to take your small children there? Okay, let's look at another artist, Ester Hernandez. She grew up in California's San Joaquin Valley, and she unknowingly bathed and drank polluted water and worked in an environment contaminated by pesticides. The Hernandez family actively involved in the struggle for family or farm workers' rights, an issue of concern to both Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. So again, the issues that I was bringing up, and you saw those issues also presented in the work of Yolanda. And so now let's look here at Ester Hernandez's work. So again, these issues of work, race, class, racism, okay? So here's this piece, 1982, called Sun Mad. Some of you may recognize this brand or the other side of that brand, right? The darker side of it. The sun, believe they were the sun-made raisins. So here you'll see the image says unnaturally grown with insecticides, miticides, herbicides, fungicides. So again, pointing to the contamination of pesticides. So she questions the efforts of pesticides on agricultural workers, prompted her to make Sun Mad. Her posters have been controversial. Okay, so again, issues of those intersectional things we're looking at and talking about. A couple other pieces by Ester Hernandez. You'll see here Aztlan, 1976. Let's draw our attention there. So here you have a dominant icon of the United States, the Statue of Liberty. And then you have a sculpture here from the base working up and inscribing Aztlan and going upward, again to decenter the dominant narrative, to really to hone that indigenous history in the United States. So in that way, it's a critique on the dominant narrative. And then also to think about the Statue of Liberty itself. Where is that located in the United States? What immigrants does it welcome? And I'll challenge you to think about, why don't we have a Statue of Liberty on the US-Mexican border? So do that comparison. Let's look at this other one called La Virgen Defendiendo los Derechos Humanos, 1975. So here she is as a karate type of person, again, fighting for human rights and using the imagery of the Virgencita, but putting it in a different perspective, if you will, as a fighter, as someone that fights for human rights. Queer Aztlan, same-sex desires. So again, this is another artist, Alma Lopez, and here's some of her digital prints. Let's see, 1988 and 1999, Lupe and Sirena in Love. So again, thinking about lesbianism, same-sex desires, and then you're going to see the historical context around them at the US-Mexican border. Here we have 1848. This is when Mexico loses half of its territory to the United States, northern Mexico, these types of things. And then we see two very iconic female figures, if you will, La Sirena from Loteria, you may be familiar with her, and then of course La Virgencita. So these very taboo things around homosexuality, same-sex desires, lesbianism within the community and dominant society. And then again, another image of La Virgencita, okay? And so this is not a disrespect of the Virgin Mary, but to think about her in a more plethora or different ways, right? Not to always construct her within a patriarchal Catholic way. So Chicanas and the mural movement. So here we have Judy Baca. She was a key muralist during the movement and beyond. So I have a quote here I'm going to read to you, and this will encompass why the Chicana artists do the work they do, okay? I want to produce artwork that has meaning beyond the simple decorative values. I hope to use public space to create public voice and consciousness about the presence of people who are often the majority of the population, but who may not be represented in any visual way. By telling their stories, we are giving voice to the voiceless and visualizing the whole of American story while creating sites of public memory. So again, using the artwork in a politically conscious way to represent folks that are usually underrepresented. And when they are represented in society, it's usually in a very criminalized or negative way. So thinking about that in terms of murals, or even something like Chicano Park, right? This public memory. So that's all I have for you for now, folks.